Now, I was there at the beginning and I saw it all evolve. Those first uneasy steps inside the mansion of Resident Evil, and that first air raid siren that chilled you to the bone and let you know beyond a shadow of a doubt that Silent Hill was not a tourist destination. Hi, this is Total Cult Gaming, and today we're talking about the fall and rise and fall again of survival horror. Now, the 90s console era was a very colourful and vibrant time for gaming, with the N64 taking Nintendo into the realms of 3D with hits like Mario 64, and Sony PlayStation giving us the cartoon world of Crash Bandicoot. It was like Nickelodeon had invaded video games and it was here to stay. Now, this is long before downloads and internet gaming was even conceived of, so when a magazine had a cover disc full of demos, we all clamoured over these tasty morsels of what's to come. Now, the most standout of these for me personally was the playable demo of Silent Hill, a mainstay of today's horror games but a completely unknown quantity back then. You're greeted with a simple story of finding your missing daughter after being separated in an accident, and you wandered the misty streets of this ghost town until you were led down a dark alley with only a cigarette lighter illuminating the increasingly oppressive atmosphere. And then you heard it, that unmistakable air raid siren being cranked by an unseen hand off in the distance, the concrete walls and floor giving way to rusted chain link and barbed wire, and the misty air becomes a torrential downpour of rain, and then what you thought was your daughter turned round and turns out to be a couple of deformed children grabbing at you and slicing you up with a kitchen knife. And then the demo ended, and this, more than any other survival horror experience, paved the way for dozens of games to come. The idea was simple: you were underprepared, you were insufficiently armed, and you couldn't stop the threat, you could only hope to survive it. Now, Resident Evil handled things in a very similar vein. You were armed, you were a special tactics unit, but you had severely limited resources and ammo. Strength of arms was not enough to see you through. Now, it had an emphasis on exploration and puzzle solving, so it forced you to face the fear of an ever-present threat behind every locked door. Now, the second and arguably best instalment of both Silent Hill and Resident Evil ramped up both the scare factor and gameplay while keeping the core of what made them great intact. Silent Hill 2 is still held up as one of the greatest games of all time, and its main antagonist, the Red Pyramid or Pyramid Head, is now an iconic figure of horror. But as time passed and the console technology got better and more powerful, something went awry. By the fifth instalment of both series, they had changed drastically, Resident Evil opting for a more action-packed third-person shooter that had you dispatching the horrors with fully automatic weapons and hand-to-hand techniques. And as such, the enemies became less of a threat and more of an obstacle to be removed. With Silent Hill, the change was subtler but still very noticeable. With the original developers no longer having a hand in newer titles, Silent Hill somehow lost its edge. It chose to focus on already established antagonists and fears like the overly sexualised yet proper messed up nurses, and that easily recognisable Pyramid Head. Silent Hill lost sight of what made the first few games so unsettling: the unknowable. Now, that's not to say these games are bad. I loved Resident Evil 5. I got thoroughly engrossed in Murphy's story in Silent Hill Downpour, but as good as they were, they just weren't the thrill rides that had come before. Survival horror was out and action horror was in. Both these franchises even spawned Hollywood blockbuster movies that missed the point more than a Segway on a treadmill. We had a brief glimpse of hope in Dead Space, which gave us a taste of the rebirth of survival horror, but by the third game it had turned into yet another action-driven third-person shooter riddled with EA's usual cash grab DLC. But yet there is still hope. In recent years there have been more survival horror games from indie developers that seem to have spurred on a resurgence of this gone but not forgotten genre. Games like Amnesia, that penalises you for even looking at the twisted forms pursuing you. Haunted House Walking Simulator, Layers of Fear, that uses tension to a near perfect degree. And Outlast, that sees you trapped in an asylum with some unspeakable horrors, armed only with a night vision camera. It even tells you in the loading blurb your only options are run, hide or die. Now, Sega's Alien Isolation showed us what a AAA survival horror should look like. It had atmosphere and tension coming out of the goddamn walls and an AI so adaptive you actually feel hunted. I remember picking up the flamethrower and thinking, yep, who's in charge now? The xenomorph appears and proceeds to get a face full of fire. I'd levelled the playing field until the next time it approached. I raised my flamethrower ready to fire and it just stopped dead. It looked at me for a second and then disappeared off into a vent. I just stood there frozen for a while, just blinking in disbelief. It recognised the gun, it changed its tactics, and suddenly that playing field was not so level. Sadly, with the rise of so many indie horror titles, it seems that Steam Early Access is now awash with Outlast and Amnesia clones, games made without much consideration using pre-purchased assets in the Unity engine without even so much of a lick of paint to disguise the cookie-cutter approach to game design, and that in and of itself is causing the beloved survival horror genre to become stale and oversaturated. And with Silent Hills now cancelled and PT removed from the PlayStation Store, the only light at the end of this jump scare ridden tunnel is Death Stranding, the new project Hideo Kojima is working on. And if anyone can resuscitate the idea of unknowable horror, it's going to be that weirdo.